Hello and welcome. I'm Laura Briggs with the Vegan Fitness Runner podcast, where I'll be talking all things running, health and fitness, and what it means to be an active vegan. Jen Scotney, former ultra runner and lawyer turned coach and author, is celebrating the release of her new book, Running Through the Dark, The Rise and Fall of an Ultra Runner. We chat about the themes that underpin it, including grief, loss, resilience, and the ultimate star, the Pennine Way.
I'm here with Jen Scotney. Jen, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Now, Jen, you have just written a book, which I finished. It's amazing. And it's called Running Through the Dark. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and what you do?
Yeah, well, we've just been discussing that what I do is quite a long-winded answer. So the book, Running Through the Dark, is my first book, and it's about running, kind of my attempts to run the Pennine Way. But I think if I had to describe the themes in the book, it's a lot about grief of losing health and losing futures and bereavements. And so, that was the book. And in terms of what I do, I mean, I live in the Scottish Highlands now and I've got a podcast called Resilience Rising, and I obviously have my book out. I'd like to do more writing and do a bit of yoga teaching, do a bit of outdoor work, do a bit of coaching. So little bits of everything at the moment.
A lot of the listeners, Jen, will have heard your name, Jen Scotney. I knew you as an ultra runner, and your husband Marcus is also very well known in the ultra running community. You've done big races, and that was part of your history, wasn't it? But I was totally unaware that you, for many years, worked in the legal system. That was a big part of your life. And on having read the book, I have to say, there's a big undercurrent of tragedy, isn't there, through your life, which has obviously helped kind of form who you are now and how you've got to where you are. I have to say it was an absolute roller coaster of a read. And for those who aren't aware, you suffer from a condition called ME, don't you, which is chronic fatigue. So can you tell us a little bit about how that has affected your life?
Yeah, well, there's a whole book in there, isn't there? I mean, I wouldn't say I describe myself as one of the lucky ones. I've recovered from ME and it doesn't affect my life at all now. I think maybe I am a little bit more cautious because of it. I value my health, and maybe I have created a lifestyle that doesn't put me at such risk as before, and risk because of my risk factors and what influenced me getting ill. I think I'm not sure I'm ever going to get a answer of this is why you got so ill. And when I talk about my illness in the book, I try and describe like I was bedbound and really struggling to see any future and hope. And so for me, like you say about this like kind of tragedy in my life, I think I was just living life. And yes, I had a lot of things happening at once in terms of the death of my brother, and then that came 5 months after the death of my dad. So I had those two bereavements quite close together, and I also went through my own choice, a breakup not long after, and I don't know, like when I was, and then later the illness came, and I suppose as a package as the book, yes, there was a lot happening, but for me, it was just life. I was living it and trying to survive. And I wasn't really sat there thinking, oh, all these terrible things are happening. Like it's just day-to-day survival. And it does feel odd coming out the other side. And I think even before the book came out or I was writing the book, I would sort of mention these things in a one sentence or paragraph to people and get that reaction. But it's hard to be objective when it's just my life and what was happening day to day. And there were really moments of joy and happiness during that. And running was a big part of that. So I'd had quite a sporty childhood. And then when I was moved down to London and working as a lawyer, I worked for as human rights for children in prison and care. And work just started taking over, and kind of after 10 years, and my life was just work. I was just at my desk all time, all day, every day, weekends. Just so running, I got a dog, started getting out in the countryside when I was in the Peak District, and running, really changed my life and got me away from work and opened up a lot of life that I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't started running.
I mean, for most people, all the things that you experienced in a very short time frame might happen over, many, many years. And each thing, you talked about the death of your brother and the death of your father and, your illness. All these things on their own are quite massive life events. And it seems like it kind of hit you all at once, really. Running must have been, I'm assuming, some real release for you during those darker times.
Yeah, I mean, it still was over a period of a few years. So the book does span maybe 10 years. And then I suppose I dip back into childhood and a little bit of my past. But one of the things that came out of this was me wanting to start to talk, just for my own curiosity, about resilience, about tough times. I was quite hard on myself, and that really shone through when I was reading the book for the audio recording. I suddenly had to go in a studio and read the book that I hadn't really looked at properly for 18 months and read it. And I was thinking she was really hard on herself and thinking I wasn't resilient. And I started the podcast Resilience Rising just to share those stories about how we do get through tough times. And what that's made me feel is that what happened to me, it is a lot, but it's also just quite normal in the course of a life that we are going to have bereavements. We're going to lose people close to us. We're going to have a lot of unexpected challenges that we didn't really ask for. And I do believe that everybody's got a story of resilience. And if I asked you what your difficult days were, we'd all be able to think of something. So I don't think I'm remarkable in that sense of what's happened. But running became just such a safe space for me, I guess, is the best way to describe it. Because at the time, I was a complete perfectionist. I was trying to be the perfect lawyer and perfect girlfriend and perfect everything. And it was exhausting, and it was really difficult to hold that, especially, after I was working as a lawyer, self-employed, when my dad and my brother died, and I just went straight back to work kind of the next day, really, and tried to pretend that nothing had happened and be there for my clients. And outwardly that looks really strong, but it was so exhausting and unsustainable. So running was a place where I could just reclaim a little bit of, I guess, me. There were runs early on where I'd just sit in the woods under Cubber Edge and just sit on a log and cry. And I suppose it was the place where I could let down the mask. But then, I started taking it a lot more seriously, and I started having that high profile. And then it also became quite a stressful time where I was trying to be a perfect runner then. So there's definitely a journey there in just dropping some high standards and doing things for the joy of it.
You just said then that you realised reading the book back for audio that you were really harsh on yourself. And what came across to me in particular is the battle that you had with kind of the medical professionals, that you would go to a GP and they'd say, oh, you'll be fine, just go and be positive, or, come back another day if you don't feel great. And throughout your journey, you've been to many, many professionals, nutritionists, GPs, physios, and a lot of them seem to have knocked you back. But what comes through is that actually your resilience, you just kept battling on to try and get to the bottom of what was the problem. And that for me was like showing the fight in you. And I guess you must have had that through your running as well, that determination. And that also comes through in how you kind of dealt with finding out what was wrong with you and getting to the bottom of your illness ultimately.
Yeah, it again, that illness was over years, and there was definitely kind of problems. One of the symptoms was problems with my memory, which is why I ended up leaving my legal career, because I just couldn't juggle the cases and the workload and the reports and everything, because I just lost my memory. I was having to just write everything down. I think, I mean, I came from that, I came into that illness with a little bit of privilege in that I was educated, and it wasn't out of my comfort zone to read medical reports, and really that's what I tended to do because I had such bad insomnia at like this really low 3 a.m. where Marcus is asleep, the whole world feels like it's asleep, and I'm just lying there wondering, like feeling like my body is shutting down. So that was often where I did do some medical research. I think that where I found quite unbelievable when I was reading back was like I was spending weeks bedbound, just lying there, and I had gone to the GPs to start with, and they were I just got the same thing. Your test results are normal. And you're like, I am anything but normal. I feel like my body is shutting down. I'm really scared. I don't know what's happening. I can't function. And they just kept telling me I was normal and that I was taking up a lot of their time. I don't have loads of hope that it's changed much, but that was at a time before the pandemic and before long COVID and before this kind of really sad number of people with the post-viral fatigue or ME or long COVID. There's such an overlap. So I don't know if there's a little bit more in the kind of medical profession where they actually believe the patients. But for me, I just didn't have that. There was one doctor that sort of listened and then said, well, we don't have the answers, but do you want some antidepressants? And I was like, no. Like, for me at the time, it's like I'm not in this position because I'm depressed. I'm depressed because I can't function. Like I can't get out of bed and walk. So yeah, but looking back, I do feel like, why wasn't I knocking on the doctors like every single day or sending somebody to knock on the doctors? Like what I feel like I put up with it a lot. And I just have to look compassionately at me back then. I was doing my best and I didn't have the energy to fight anymore. I didn't have the energy to fight with the doctors. Like I just felt lost. And I did try to go down the private route, but it's so hard to know where to go with very limited resources. I was getting into debt trying to see private ones. And so I'm really grateful that Vertebra Publishing, when they didn't edit anything out, like it is really as I wrote it. And I was wondering if some publishers would want to take that out in terms of a criticism against the medical profession about kind of the treatments and my route. I do go into quite a lot of detail about that. And at the time, I wasn't ever thinking the book would be published. I was supposed to be writing a different book. And so I wrote just to really process it in my own head about what had happened. And so I'm grateful they left it in. And I then had a decision, like, do I actually want all this published? Because it's so personal, everything in the book. And I just thought about those people that are still suffering from chronic illnesses, not just long COVID, but there's so many people with ME or other conditions where they're not getting the answers, they're not getting any support, and it does feel very invisible. It feels like you've forgotten. And so I thought it could be worth just getting the book out, just so that I hope it gets into their hands and they have a little friend that I've been through this. And I have hope that there's something out there that your body needs or you need to improve. And I hope that we can find that.
You show people who weren't quite aware of how debilitating the disease could be, like myself, how really crushing it is as well. I mean, there's a paragraph in there where you describe it, and it's something along the lines of, imagine having flu and having been run over and then a massive weight being pressed on your head and you just literally cannot move your body. I mean, it sounds horrifying, quite frankly. And, to have gone from, so physically able and, running all the time to having to deal with those moments must be just completely debilitating. You explored quite a lot of ways to try and improve the condition, didn't you, in terms of diet and supplements and acupuncture. Can you talk us through some of those?
Yeah, I mean, originally, so unlike a lot of people that I spoke to who, there's quite a few people with ME that became very ill overnight. That wasn't my experience. And I just started getting tired. So the first time it happened, I donated blood, which I kind of done a few times before. And I'd gone to the doctor and I just thought I was anemic. I felt lightheaded and tired, and that was what came back, that yes, take these iron tablets and you'll be fine. But what I found was that months of taking iron tablets, and then my fatigue was just getting worse and worse. So it was getting so that by like 4 p.m, I just couldn't function. I couldn't stand and cook. I couldn't walk the dog. I was just on the sofa. But I think what people that haven't experienced it really struggle with. You can stay in bed, you can lie in bed all day and you're not better, you're not rested. Even if I had really bad insomnia, but even if I got sleep, I feel worse after sleep. And that's what I think is really difficult to get across to people. Even my close friends would either be thinking this was a short-term thing and like, oh, you're not better yet, when I said 2 weeks later, no, I'm still suffering. Or it would be, oh yeah, no, I didn't sleep well, I know what you're going through. And so, yeah, that was quite important to me to try and get across how awful it is. I went down a lot of roads. I did have good results with a Chinese doctor and acupuncture in the short, with those initial periods of fatigue, and then I'd kind of get complacent and not go, because also it was kind of an expense that I was struggling with, and it was an afternoon off work because I had to drive to it. And so I cut back on that, and then I find a few months later I'd still get ill. I wasn't vegan at the time that I started getting ill, but that was something, I have been vegetarian mostly all my life. And it was a Chinese doctor that suggested that dairy and cold foods and might not be good for my body. So that's when I switched to veganism, and I tried everything. And by the end of it, I felt like my body was shutting down. I was going to die. And I would have tried anything. Like, there was some drugs out there for rheumatology conditions. So there was just things that were coming up in papers, and I'm like, I just want to get my hands on it. And you'll find out in the book, like, one of the things that helped me was buying drugs online, and I bought them illegally and injected myself. And that's how desperate I felt, because it was like, well, I don't care if it can't make me worse. And it's a really, really desperate situation, and something that I wish, that others didn't have to go through. I tried a lot. I saw some dietitians. By the time that I got better, I was gluten-free. That had really helped with some of my joint pain and inflammation. And I was seeing a functional nutritionist who was doing different tests and are on offer on the NHS. And she was getting down to my immune system, and that this was an immune system issue, whereas for years and years I thought it was stress, cortisol, and something more to do with that. And so we were getting there. And then I just had a complete luck that when I had my COVID vaccine, that really just took away that last bit of fatigue. It improved things for me. I thought it was going to be temporarily, but thankfully I got there, and so far not had any issues since.
I find that incredible, that section where you talk about, really worrying about having to go for your COVID vaccination and panicking that your body wouldn't respond well to another onslaught, and actually coming away from that and thinking, oh, I think this actually making me feel better. That blew my mind a little bit, because, and I suppose that's when you realised, was it, that it had been an immune issue the whole time? Was that kind of the eureka moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe we're not so that it's not such an isolated thing. And I do feel like one of the difficulties that I had was trying to separate that mental and physical aspect of the body, which I'm not sure that I could do. And then when I was looking, like we've already touched on, those really high standards of perfectionism and why was I putting myself under so much stress? And one thing that I talk about in the book is is people pleasing, never really putting my needs forward, and then ruminating and feeling quite, sad about that. And so it's well, is it just an immune system issue, or is it just holistically? For me, it was just this whole period. I think there were aspects of my personality that I was bringing that weren't helping me. So that's something that's really changed. And then there was the blood donation. I'd had a kidney infection and had antibiotics for like the first time in my life. And I'd had all these, a lot of and then the bereavements. I'd had so many things that maybe just came together at the wrong time. And I'm really careful when I do talk maybe on social media about that I am one of the lucky ones that have recovered, and I'll get a lot of messages from people saying, oh, what happened? Like, how did you recover? What worked? And I'll always share that. But I think what works for me is unlikely maybe to work for others. Maybe I'm happy to share it because I do want to encourage people. I know how hard it is when you're ill and limited energy, but not to just accept what you're told from maybe the NHS and really do your own research and see what feels right for your body. But so I will talk about what happened, but I think it's so hard because it's such an individual thing, and what happened, what worked for me, there's no guarantee it'll work for anyone else.
A big thread in the book is the Pennine Way. What's your connection to that?
Oh, it's so lovely. It's the first interview I've done, Laura, with somebody who's read the book, and we can have a chat about it. I mean, the Pennine Way was kind of the whole point of the book. It was never really going to be about me, which sounds ridiculous because, you can tell just from all the topics that we've talked about how personal the book is. I had run the coast to coast in a race and just kind of spent a lot of the time on my own and quite hungry, which is fine. That's part of it. But I just was my mind was drifting in the last section about, how much faster could I have run if I'd have had a bit of support, a bit of people to cheer me on. And I was thinking about coming back, and I kind of realised that my heart was on the Pennine Way. So this is something, it's 268 miles from Edale, near where I used to live in the Peak District, all the way up to Scotland, which sounded quite exotic when I was a child. And my mum and dad had walked it in 1974, and we'd always just had the photos around and stories and tales. I've got my dad's diary of when they did it. It was such a big thing in their life. So that's inspired me. And then I've often lived near the Pennine Way. I spent quite a bit of time at University of Manchester, and then coming back when I was working as a lawyer there for a few years. And so it kind of keeps popping up, and I just love it. There's something about those moorlands, and I love this time of the year. We're going into September, and like when it starts getting a bit cooler and orange and golden and boggy, and I just really love that terrain. So yeah, that was really the landscape that was inspiring me, and maybe my mum and dad's story of it. So I have done the Spine Challenger, which is the first 100 and bit miles. I've done that 3 times, so I really got to know that bit. And then I started recceing the upper sections, and it was always my intention to run it outside of a race so that I could have support and friends along the way. And yeah, and then when I started running it, started thinking about running it, I was wondering if there was any women that had run it outside of the race, because none came to mind. And that put me down a road of really looking at the stories of those men that had run it, and they did have women supporting them. But I started speaking to those women and trying to find out if anybody had tried it in the past. And that was really what the book was going to be about, everybody else's stories. And then I'd just pop up at the end and have like a really easy run along it and just have a lovely time. And it probably wouldn't have been such a harrowing roller coaster of a book that we've got.
But it's such an intricate story, and I think at the beginning we're very much geared for you to complete the Pennine Way. That's how we kind of start the book, and it just takes you in such a different direction. And to have not got your FKT on the Pennine Way, which is so close to you. So, yeah, sorry, everybody. How do you feel about that now? Like, and how do you feel when other people do that run?
I mean, I'm jealous. I do feel envious of people that can just get out of bed and run. I admit that. And I would just, yeah. And I miss running. I miss just moving pain-free. And so there is that grief there. But there's also, I suppose, a reflection about why we do these really long challenges. There just isn't an argument that it's healthy for our bodies. Like, it is just a stress and a trauma on our bodies. And so for me, that exploration was, why do I feel like I need to prove myself doing these big challenges? And I suppose going back to the running, I was talking about how, it gave me this space to, really let my feelings and come out. But also then the recognition from running gave me quite a lot of self-worth and just this external validation that I perhaps hadn't had before. And it felt really healthy until it was taken away, and then it feels really fragile. So it was, I think, moving towards the book, at the end of the book, is looking at, this need for challenging, this almost like need to be extraordinary and be different. And for me, it's not sustainable. Like, it wasn't, because I can't do those things. And I did have this moment when I stopped running that, I'll just move into cycling and do all these, sleep deprived, enjoy. Like, I literally had the entry for some of those. And what I found was that cycling wasn't pain-free either. But by that point, talking about these completely losing your health and being bedbound, it's given me a different perspective about how precious my energy and my health is. And I don't want to go through that period again. And if that means looking after myself and not doing and getting to bed every night and getting my sleep, then, I mean, I'm not saying that I won't do any long things or maybe go through a night or anything like that, but I just don't feel that need, and I don't feel the need to prove it, to make me seem like a worthy person, that I have to do something extraordinary anymore. So I think that's definitely been a shift in perspective through the illness and through just not being able to do the long distances.
Interestingly, you said within the book, when you were running to a high level, you would finish one thing and then you'd be asked immediately, right, what's next, Jen? What's next? And that's the kind of pressure that other people and ourselves, we put upon ourselves, don't we? And we're always thinking, what can I do that's longer, faster, harder, tougher? We don't need to do that to be validated, do we? We can find kind of peace and power in the smaller everyday. And I think that's what you show through this book, that actually you kind of look back and you see that